My name is Nik Charlebois. I'm a PM on the Microsoft Graph team. I'm a new face on the team. I personally focus on everything that's related to Graph Data Connect. Today we have a full agenda. So we're going to be talking today about, first thing is we might juggle the agenda a bit, but we're going to be talking about the Microsoft 365 Developer Survey. Then we're going to have a MSAL talk about the Microsoft Graph Java SDK version 3 that was recently released. Then the famous Vincent Biret is going to be doing an overview and a demo of Project Kiota. Then we're going to have Elise and Amruta talk about Microsoft Graph Toolkit, show us what's new and what's coming. So first off, I need to do a quick shout out to our friend and colleague Sébastien Levert, who's out today. It is his birthday, so if you see him on social media, just make sure you wish him an happy birthday. If you are interested in presenting, if you have a solution that's using the Microsoft Graph, or if there's a specific topic you'd be interested in presenting, something you've built, something that your organization is working on, please feel free to reach out to Brian, Jeremy, or myself. We're more than happy to have you on one of the upcoming calls that we're going to have. With no further ado, let's start with the Java SDK.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Maisa Risse, and I am a PM on Microsoft Graph Developer Experience team. Today, as Nick said, I'm going to highlight some of the new features and improvements in our Microsoft Java SDK. So we recently announced the general availability of Microsoft Graph Java SDK v3. This new version of the SDK now liberates Azure Identity to improve the authentication experience, providing support for device code flow and client certification credentials grant flow that were not previously supported. Device authorization grant allows users to sign in to input-constrained devices, such as smart TV, IoT devices, or printer. And client credential flow allows you to access web-hosted resources by using the identity of an application, commonly used for server-to-server interactions. So now you can use a single API to authenticate against Azure services and Microsoft Graph. We all know it's important to have the possibility to call the Microsoft Graph in the background to not block the main thread in your application. Taking into this in consideration, the custom interface to asynchronous request has been removed, and the API now returns completable feature to deliver a standard and modern and fluent user experience without compromising on the compatibility. Talking about fluid experience, the batch support has been improved to provide a cleaner API surface to the SDK users. The SDK now produces methods to include the count of items included in collections. This change allows you to write more specific requests, reducing the permissions required for your application. So it's no longer necessary to use query option or custom request to get the number of records. Just a note here, filter, order by, top, skin token, and expand are maintained through the use of query options. To provide a modern, more reliable, and faster data and time API, you can use offset data time instead of calendar, covering a broader set of scenarios and providing more consistent APIs. It was also added optional parameters for all data. The SDK now makes use of parameter classes with Fluent builders. So to align with the SDK design specifications, we removed unnecessary interfaces to avoid confusion and duplication, refactored package names and classes names to clarify the intent of them, and moved all code from the service library to the core library, since the service library was designed to contain code generated automatically from the API metadata. Requests, builders, and responses have been refactored to take advantage of generic types, maximizing code reusability, improving performances, binary sizes, and much more. Multiply improvements to the Java doc, and annotation as nullable and no-null have been added to the SDK. To support all these new features and improve the development experience provided by the SDK, the minimum Java version was updated from 7 to 8. Through the aka MS GA Java v3, you have access to detailed information about the Java SDK v3 and find important links such as the upgrade guide, where you can see all the updates for this new version and which improvements are considered as a breaking changes and which are not. The Java SDK is available on GitHub, where you can read our wiki, open issues, and submit requests, pull requests. So now I'll hand to Vincent to talk about Kiota. Thank you.
Thank you, Mesa. Great work by the team there. Vincent, so if you want to take over, I will let you introduce and demo Project Kiota.
Sure. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Vincent here. I'm a senior software developer on the Microsoft Graph SDK team, and today I'm going to talk about Project Kiota. So before I talk about Project Kiota, I have to talk about how do we ship SDKs today and how do we make SDKs available to you so you can use them in your applications. First and foremost, we have different services like SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, and many more that put together something called a CSDL. CSDL is a document that allows those different services saying, hey, I have an entity that's a drive item. It's going to be at this and that place in the API, and it's going to behave this and that way, contain those different fields. It's a way for us as Microsoft, but also for you to understand what's the shape of the APIs and what do they contain. So they work on that, and they work with the API Council to design and build a clean and lean API surface and document that API using a CSDL document. Once we have that CSDL document, we, the SDK team, take it and put it in a tool called TypeWriter, which parses that CSDL document, understands the different OData conventions, use different T4 templates to actually generate the SDKs, because most of the SDK that you're using are actually generated. They are not handwritten because the API is way too large and it would take us too much time to handwrite all of that for each and every language. So that's what happens on the one hand. On the one hand, we use TypeWriter with the CSDL, and that gives us SDKs. But of course, we want to make sure those SDKs are up to standards, they are good quality. So we have a second tool called the DevX API that generates the snippets in the documentation. It also generates the code snippets when you use Graph Explorer. And this is how you get from an HTTP request on Microsoft Graph to a code sample, a code snippet in .NET, Java, or any other language. So we use that second tool and the CSDL again to generate the different snippets in the documentation. And once we have both the snippets and the SDKs, we use both the SDK in combination with the snippets, and we try to compile the snippets against the SDKs to make sure that the generations are aligned, things are working as expected, and so on and so forth. And if Raptor gives us a green light, Raptor being the process that compiles the snippets against the SDKs, this is when we say, all right, this newer version of the SDK that has the latest and greatest version of the API and provides the latest and greatest entities and Fluent API and so on and so forth actually works. We can release it in the open, and this is how you get it. So as you can see, it's a fairly complex process today, and it requires some knowledge about OData and CSDL, which is not super popular and easy to understand. So it makes it a bit hard for the community to contribute here. Some other challenges that we're facing: the data complexity leaks in the different templates, and by that I mean specific conventions, instead of being understood and planned for and parsed for, are at one place. They are being done in different templates for the different languages, so we duplicate the effort here. The T4 templates themselves are great, but the lack of tooling, they induce some kind of duplication. It is really hard for open source contributors that don't have prior experience to understand how they work and what to do with it, and they're kind of slow as well. And another challenge that we have, and feedback that we've heard from the community, from you guys, is that having an SDK is great, but our SDKs, because Microsoft Graph is getting larger and larger and larger and larger, are getting big and monolithic. So this is not so much a problem for backend APIs on servers that have tons of space and so on, but it might become a challenge for mobile APIs or front-end mobile applications, or front-end applications, where you want to trim down the size of the application so it's easier to distribute to the end user. So that's another challenge. Today we are only able, via that tool, to ship SDKs for the full API, not a subset. Also, the feedback from the tests comes very late. Instead of having unit testing very early on to test on the conventions and other things like that, we actually rely on Raptor, that is at the end of the process, to get the tests and to get the feedback from the generation process. Did it work? Did it produce something that was expected? And that slows down our ability to innovate and make major changes. And lastly, all that tooling is great, but it only works for Microsoft Graph, which means that if you have an API of your own, or if we want to use it for other APIs, well, all that tooling cannot work with those different set of APIs. So now let's talk about Project Kiota. So we still have the services that are OneDrive, SharePoint, Exchange, and many more that are building that CSDL description of the service and the APIs. And now we have a tool that's provided by the Open API community that allows us to convert that CSDL document into an Open API description. So for those of you that don't know about Open API is this standard that's been around for a couple of years now. It used to be called Swagger a long time ago, and it's a way of a standardized way that's broadly adopted to describe your API and to say, all right, my API has all those endpoints, they accept those different parameters, they respond that different type of response with a schema and so on and so forth. So again, we are able to, thanks to that community, to describe our API Microsoft Graph in a standard way, and also to convert existing description into Open API. Once we have that Open API document, we feed it into Kiota, that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes, and we use that to generate SDKs. If we talk about the high-level architecture before we dive into the code, again, we have this Open API document that comes in. Kiota has a builder, so that builder uses the Open API libraries and parses the document thanks to that, and generates a code dump. So a little bit like you have web browsers that have that generate a code dump from the HTML they receive to understand all the different elements that are on the page and what they need to display on the screen for the user and those different things. Well, we kind of have the same mechanism, but for code. This code dump is a very high-level, abstract notion of, hey, we need a class, or hey, we need a method, or hey, we need a property within that class, and so on and so forth. And we describe at a very high level, abstracted, all the things we need to generate in the SDK. Once we have that code dump, we use it and we feed it into the language refiner, which is a way for us to flavor that code dump in a .NET kind of way, or flavor that code dump in a TypeScript kind of way, or flavor again in different languages. Why are we doing that? Well, some languages support more or less features. They are capable of doing different things, and we want to make sure that the code dump is that we feed to the writer is most adapted to that specific language. And then we pass it on to the writer, which is going to take that flavored code dump and actually write the different files and generate the different SDK in the desired language. A few advantages. So as we've seen, the OData conventions are abstracted away by the Open API conversion step. So that's something that we are not responsible for anymore. That's the Open API and the OData communities that are doing that for us. It's more robust. It's at one place. There is no more duplication anymore. We have a very testable generation process. That was kind of one of the key requirements or kind of a key design we had in mind. And the idea was that we wanted to design and build a generator that's easy to test and to unit test, so we can get feedback very early on and iterate on that feedback very early on rather than later in the process. We don't have any duplication within the languages. If I want to define how do I write a method in Java, I only do it once at one place in the writer, and then it's been reused whenever it's needed. But we don't have duplication of what is a method, how I define the accessibility of that method, and so on and so forth anymore within the languages. It is done once per language. It's going to be easier to contribute to, and the reason is because we're relying on plain .NET. There is no T4 anymore. The tooling support is great, and it's easier to understand for community members. We are also going to be able to ship modular SDKs. So part of the vision is to give you a way to say, hey, I want to have only the mail things for Microsoft Graph, because my application will only do that. I don't care about the files. I don't care about, I don't know, the security policies or anything like that, because my application is not going to touch that. So I'm going to select those different aspects and those different endpoints in some kind of tool that will provide you, and then you'll be able to generate your own SDK for your application using Kiota for just that smaller part of Microsoft Graph, which will be super appreciated by mobile applications or front-end applications or other kind of applications like that. And thank you for all the hearts and the claps. It also will work with any API that has an Open API description. So we're building the tool in a way that it works first for Microsoft Graph and the SDKs that we're building. But if you have in-house APIs, and if those APIs have an Open API description, you'll be able to use Kiota, feed in that Open API description instead, and get a fluent SDK in the language of choice for that specific API. And lastly, it's also plug and play. We received feedback that some people prefer this or that JSON serializer, for example, or some people prefer this or that HTTP client. So it is also designed in a way that we have a high level of abstraction. We'll provide, of course, default implementations, but the idea is that we also make it possible for people to say, hey, I don't like your default implementation. I want to build mine, and I want to plug mine instead. So that's the idea that we have. And with that, I'm going to jump into the demo and share my screen. So here I have Kiota, and before we dive into Kiota itself, I have this Open API description here. It's rather lengthy, and we don't need to go over the details, but that's a description that we use, for example, to generate the partial SDKs today. And the idea is that description only contains mails things. So things about sending emails, getting the emails from Microsoft Graph, getting the attachments, all those different things. It doesn't contain anything else than things that are related to Microsoft Graph messages capabilities. And it's effectively a subset of Microsoft Graph. So that's the first thing. In terms of how Kiota is built, well, we do have a few things here. First, we have a generator that's contained in the source folder. And you'll see that, as I mentioned, we have different constructs for the code DOM. So what is a namespace, what is a method, what is a class, and those different things. But we also have different writers for the different languages, for TypeScript, Java, and C# here as well, and the different writers for the different languages here that are available. And finally, we also have the builder that I was mentioning earlier that takes in in the Open API description, parses it, generates the code DOM, calls the different refiners and the different writers to generate the SDK. So that's a high-level overview of how Kiota works. I'm going to fire off a generation and show you what you get out of it. And before I do that, here I have this other project, which is TypeScript starter for a Node.js application. I chose TypeScript for today, and I chose a Node.js application for today as well. But this would work in a browser. This would work in .NET or in Java as well. Those are the three languages we're supporting today. So I'm going to go ahead and clear the part that is being generated here, as you can see. There we go. And I'm going to start the generation. So I've set up Kiota I've set up my environment to be able to generate things. So here you can see that I'm calling Kiota, not for Java, for TypeScript. Here you can see that I'm calling Kiota. I'm passing it the Open API description. I'm saying, hey, I want a TypeScript thing, and please put all the files here. And here's the namespace, even though it's not namespace in TypeScript, that I want you to generate things in as well. So I'm going to kick off the generation process. You'll see that very quickly it will go ahead, parse the Open API description, generate the code DOM, refine it, and write all the different files. So again, all of that is going through the Open API description, generating a code DOM, parsing, refining that code DOM in a TypeScript flavor, and then calling the writer to write all the different files to the local storage. And there we go, generation is finished. So again, within a few seconds, and keep in mind that me sharing my screen and so on impacts the performance of my computer, we were able to generate an SDK for the messages subset of Microsoft Graph. So here you can see that all the things that I had previously deleted are back. And one great thing about Kiota is we try to make it so what we generate is easy to map with the API. So you'll see that the folders or the namespace segmentation is very close to what you find in the API. We know that messages, for example, are attached to users or are under users or groups, of course, on the Microsoft Graph API. So you can see that under users, I have a message entity here. I also have, for the messages, the different request builders and the different things. And all of that is segmented in a way that is very similar to the API to understand how we can, how this code and how the things that are being generated map to the API itself. So now if we jump into the application, my actual application, you can see that the first thing I'm doing here is I'm using Azure Identity to get the token and to authenticate against Microsoft Graph. I'm passing that authentication provider to the core provider. So again, that's one of the things we've implemented by default. We've implemented a way using Fetch to talk to Microsoft Graph behind the scenes. All of that probably needs a bit of cleanup to provide a fluent API for the configuration, but all of that is plug and play. So that comes from our core library. So you can pass the authentication provider in our HTTP core provider, and then you take the client that has been generated locally, and you pass it also the serialization factory. Again, all of that will be cleaned up in the future, and the core thing, all of that is plug and play as well, as I mentioned, and you're ready to go. You're ready to use the API. So here, what do I have? Let me just, because I made it bigger. Here you can see that if I do client dot control space, you'll see that I get my Fluent API. So I get users. I can get all the users if I want. Or if I want to get a single user, I can get a single user. You can see I get auto completion. I get the different things that are available again. I get the documentation, inbox, and so on and so forth. And finally, when I'm ready to make my mail folders by ID. Finally, when I'm ready to make my request, I can do .get if I want to get things, .post if I want to create things, and so on and so forth. All of that returns promises in TypeScript. It returns futures in Java and tasks in .NET. And if we go ahead and actually debug that application, you'll see that it will build the application. and it will start debugging the application in a few seconds. There we go. So here it's telling me, hey, because I'm using the device code flow, but again, it's because of Azure Identity, it would work with any kind of flow for the back end, for the front end, for anything you want to do. And here I'm going to Chrome with my debugging profile, entering the code, signing in, and that's it. I'm ready to use my app that I'm showing to you here. So if we get back here, I have a breakpoint that stopped here. So you can see that what happened here. Using the Fluent API, I used my client. I got my own user here. I got a specific message with a specific ID, and I executed the request with a .get. Here, if I can hover, you can see that I have my deserialized message with all the different properties, with sub-properties. Eventually, it all deserializes recursively that are available. And here, then, I'm using this message, I'm getting the subject, I'm logging in. Also, I'm doing the same thing for the recipients, so you will see it in the console appearing. And the second thing I wanted to show you is we also have serialization, of course. So here I'm creating a new message. Oops, sorry about that. I'm creating a new message. I'm setting the different properties I want to set. All of that, again, supports auto-completion because we're using TypeScript. And here I'm using the default serializer that's provided to actually serialize the message that I could eventually send or do anything with on the wire. We also support enumerations. We support collections, of course, and many, many other things. And here you can see in the console that I have my serialized payload here with the different properties that's ready to send to Microsoft Graph. With that, I'll get back to the slides to handle questions and eventually give it to the next presenter.
Thanks, Vincent. This is very interesting stuff. And it's great to see the demo, right? I think it really helps capture what Project Kiota is all about. One quick question, how would people get started with this? Like if they want to get involved and contribute to the project as well, like where would they go?
Sure, that's my next slide. So if you want to get started with Kiota, one place to go, github.com/Microsoft/Kiota, that's KIOTA. And there you can do a couple of different things. We still have a couple of pull requests to merge and clean up, but you can go and try Kiota either on your own API or on Microsoft Graph and give us feedback around that. You can also tell us your expectations about TypeScript Fluent API, because one of the first things we're trying to tackle via Kiota is to make sure you get a Fluent API for TypeScript, because we know that's been a consistent request for the past few years, let's say. So if you have expectations in terms of a TypeScript Fluent API, what it should look like, how it should behave, all those different things, it is feedback we want to hear about. It is things we want to discuss with you about. So we make sure we build the greatest TypeScript Fluent API. And with that, if there are no questions, I'll hand it to the Microsoft Graph Toolkit team to tell us more about their new features and new capabilities. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vincent. Elise, Amruta, if you want to take over.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elise Yang, and I am a program manager on the Microsoft Graph Toolkit team. And with me today, I have Amruta. Amruta, do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Amruta, and I'm a software engineer on the Microsoft Graph Toolkit team.
So today we're going to show you and talk about what's new in the Microsoft Graph Toolkit, as well as what we're currently working on and what's coming soon in the next couple months. First off, for what's new, we released version 2.1 of the toolkit a couple of weeks ago. So this includes a lot of new features and improvements to what we released with 2.0. So if you haven't seen that yet or haven't tried it out, I would highly recommend that you do so. You can just go download it from our repository at ak.ms/mgt. Another thing that's new is that we have a new Microsoft Graph Toolkit Learn module, which was created by the advocates Aicha, Rabia, and Waldek. So thanks to them. I would recommend trying this out if you haven't used the toolkit at all yet. It gives a great overview of what the toolkit is and also walks you step by step through how you can build your first single page application using the toolkit. And finally, the last thing that we have new is a new authentication provider for Electron. So Amrita is going to actually go a little bit more into detail about that and show you a demo as well.
Yeah, thank you, Elise. Hi, I'm Amrita again, and I'm a software engineer on the Microsoft Graph Toolkit team. And I'm super excited to talk to you about our latest addition to the toolkit in V2.1, which is our Electron Provider. Now, before I get into what that is, in case you're not aware of the toolkit, I thought I'd give you a brief intro. So the Microsoft Graph Toolkit is a collection of UI components and authentication providers that make using the graph really, really easy and help you create these data-rich and user-centric experiences with very few lines of code in your application. So there are two parts to that, UI components and authentication providers. So when you talk about the UI components, these are fully functional right out of the box. And they use data from the graph, and they help you render it really beautifully with just basically 2 to 3 lines of code. And the best place to kind of explore all the components we have is here at mgt.dev. An example of one of our UI components is the people picker. And this is basically like a multi-select dropdown, which allows you to pick people from your organization or people you work with. So I can even like start typing in like the first few letters of the name, and it's going to allow me to pick multiple people. As you can see, this actually is pulling data from the graph to render this for you. Similarly, you have a component like MGT agenda. So all you have to do is include this HTML tag and of course import our library and authenticate to get all of this beautifully rendered agenda data. And they're super customizable with your own, you can add your own CSS, make them match the look and feel of your application. So that's where UI components are concerned. And there are a lot more components here on the left that you can go and look at and play with. So as you can imagine, all of these components use the graph in a different way. They call different graph APIs. So we have to first be authenticated with Microsoft Identity to be able to get these access tokens for the graph. And that's where our authentication providers come in. So we have different authentication providers for the different platforms that you may want to build on that help abstract away all of that code that you would need to get access tokens, not only for these UI components to work, but also it gives you a graph endpoint to call any graph API of your choice. And so, like I said, we have different providers for different platforms. So if you were building a web application, you would be using our MSAL provider. If you were building a SharePoint web part, you'd be using our SharePoint provider. Similarly, if you're building a Teams tab, you'd be using our Teams provider. And last but not least, if you're building an Electron app, you can use our Electron provider. And there's a very simple example of how you would use an MSAL provider here for our web application. So all you need to do is import the provider from our package, and then say providers.global provider, initialize the MSAL provider with a client ID of your app registration. And that's basically it. That's all you need to do to get authenticated, and then you can start using our UI components or even call the graph. So with that intro, let's jump to our Electron app. So here I've basically have a very simple Electron app here. And for those of you who don't know what Electron is or have never worked with it before, Electron is a framework to build native applications that are cross-platform because they're based on very fundamental web technologies like HTML and JavaScript with a Node.js backend and a Chromium frontend. And so they're cross-platform and they allow you to build, and it allows you to build native app experiences. And a lot of the most common apps that we use on Windows, like Microsoft Teams and even VS Code that you're looking at right now, are Electron applications. And Electron has two kinds of processes, main and renderer, right? And you can think of main as the backend and renderer as the front end. So the main process is responsible for the application lifecycle, for all native interactions, and also for creating renderer processes. The renderer is the UI. So every page that you would have in your Electron application would be associated with a renderer process. And the main process kind of controls the generation and deletion of these render processes. So this is just a very basic TypeScript Electron quick start kind of template project that I cloned from GitHub. All I've done right now is I npm installed these 3 packages. So the first one is MGT components, which contains all the UI MGT components that we're going to be using. This is the Electron Provider itself. It's in its own package. And then MGT element is the base package that allows these components and providers to interact with each other. And what we're going to be building today is a very simple to-do application. So we can go over here. So now we're going to try to get authenticated first using the provider. So in the main process, we're going to be initializing this class called Electron Authenticator, which is what's responsible for getting all of the access tokens. And then we're going to be like initializing something called Electron Provider in the renderer.ts file, which is just responsible for receiving all the access tokens from Electron Authenticator. So let's complete the first step. I'm going to import the Electron Authenticator in my main.ts file. So what I've done here is I've created a config object of all the details that you would need to pass to initialize Electron Authenticator, like your app registration, the window on which you want to get authenticated, which is this browser window instance, and all the scopes that you would need to call all the APIs or to render all the UI components. And last but not least, initialize the authenticator. And we're done with this part. So there's only one step left, which is in the renderer process. Like I said, we initialize something called Electron Provider. So just import these libraries. And so I just initialized the provider, and that's basically all you have to do. I'm also going to disable cache for this demo and show you the calls actually being made. And finally, we can add the components that we're going to be using. So I added MGT login, which is our login component, MGT person, which shows person details of the person logged in, and MGT to do basically displays all your to do information from Microsoft To Do. So we'll wait till it runs. Again, I think it's taking more time than usual because I'm sharing my screen. So just to recap, we initialized the Electron Authenticator in the main process, and we initialized Electron Provider, and then we added some MGT components.
So in the meantime, for folks that are following the chat, Jeremy just put out a quick survey out there, and we're just interested in knowing how many devs are actually doing dev in Electron OS right now. So if you can just do a thumbs up on Jeremy's post, we're just a quick survey to try to understand like where you guys are actually at right now with that. You and Ruda.
Yeah, thank you. So finally opened. So I'm going to sign in. So the login component basically has 2 states. When you're signing in, when nobody's signed in, it's going to say sign in and allow you to sign in. I'm going to get the password. And then once you're logged in, the login component will display your name and your picture. And yeah, so all of this data just rendered right away. And that's pretty much how easy it is to get started with the Electron Provider. And so as you can see, this is the login component. And then you have the person component that has a picture and also your status, your name. And you can always customize the amount of data you want to display here. And then all of your to-do tasks straight from Microsoft To Do. Now, this is a very basic version of the app I built, but I built the same app here. It's actually pretty much the same code, except I added a hidden feature that I'm really excited to show you. So I'm going to go to, I'm logged in as Megan, right? And this is her Teams app. So right now, Megan is available. and she's just working at a normal pace. She has this beautiful desktop wallpaper of Mount Rainier. Okay. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I have trouble focusing during the pandemic. And like, I get really annoyed when I'm trying to get something done, but people are pinging me. So I like to go to like do not disturb mode. Once I do that, my app actually turns to dark theme. And I did this solely for the purpose of showing off that MGT supports dark theme. And all you have to do to enable that is to add a class to all your MGT components or in your document, in your body dot element. But also my wallpaper changed to this giraffe that's telling me that it's watching me and I need to get back to work. Similarly, when I'm done with work, I like to appear away. And I also have this bad habit of lingering on my laptop when I'm done with work, but really I should be working out. So I have my wallpaper reminding me that I need to go work out with this cute little kitten. So how I'm doing that is in this application, it's basically the same code. So as you can see, this is the renderer process, and we initialize the Electron Provider here. What I did was I npm installed a package called wallpaper that allows me to do all the wallpaper changing magic. And what I'm basically doing is pulling presence data from the graph every 5 seconds. And this is how I'm doing it. So you can subscribe to the on-state changed event on the provider that will fire every time there's a login or a logout. So I'm checking here if a person is signed in, and then I'm calling this function called check presence. That's going to pull data every 5 seconds from the graph for the presence data. So this is how I'm calling the graph. So I don't know if you remember that I said that all our providers expose a graph endpoint that allows you to call any graph API. So here I'm using that graph endpoint to call the presence API. And I'm also checking based on what the response I receive, I'm checking what the status is. And based on that, I'm changing the wallpaper using the wallpaper npm package. And one more thing I'm doing is I'm also able to manually set the presence over here, because in our person component, we use a different polling frequency to poll for presence. But since I'm pulling presence every 5 seconds, I want to manually update that every time I get the presence data. So I just pull the MGT person DOM element, and then I manually add the presence object. So that brings me to the end of my demo. Hopefully I've shown you how easy it is to start off with the toolkit on Electron. So I can take questions now. Thank you.
Thanks, Amruta. I'm just going to bring back the slide deck, but great work. I love it when we're having fun doing demos.
Thank you.
I definitely need that presence status background switcher on top of my presence light.
Right? I actually have this app on all the time, and sometimes it really works. So I guess we can take questions after we're done too, right, Elise? Because we're also talking about our other updates.
Yeah, we have a couple more things.
Yeah.
So Rita showed us what the Electron Provider, which is available now. And then now we're going to show a couple of things that we're currently working on. We'll give you a preview of them. So first, we have 3 new components that we're working on: file, file list, and file picker components. So all 3 of these are using the OneDrive and SharePoint APIs on Microsoft Graph in order to get drive item data and render them in a component. So I actually have a demo of this, but I'll talk to this slide first and then switch. And then another thing that's coming is an MSAL 2.0 provider, which Amrita is actually working on. So did you want to provide a little bit of detail on that?
Yeah. So MSAL 2.0 provider is based on MSAL browser. And the main difference between our original MSAL provider and this new provider is it uses a different authentication flow. So our first MSAL provider is based on MSAL.js, which used implicit grant flow. And this one, MSAL 2.0 provider, uses authorization code flow, which is more secure. And that's what we're probably going to recommend to newer developers who want to start off with the toolkit. There's also a video on the next slide that shows you how easy it is if you already have an app using the MSAL provider. So basically, if you want to switch from MSAL to MSAL2 provider, you also have to have a different app registration, and you have to register as your redirect URIs as a single page application, but we will definitely be giving you docs for that to make sure that your experience with that is as seamless as possible. So yeah, you can play the video now. Yeah, so all you have to do is you see in the video screenshot. So I'm just uncommenting the MSAL2 provider with a different client ID, and the same app is working the exact same way, but with the new provider. And another addition that MSAL2 provider will bring is something Elise will talk about.
One of the added benefits of switching to MSAL 2.0 is that now there's support for logging in with multiple accounts. So we're also updating our login component to support that as well. So this is a preview of the current design that we have right now, subject to change, but just wanted to show how it's looking, taking any feedback or questions on this as well. So I wanted to show actually the 3 file components that we're working on. We do have previews available for them. So this is the first component. It's just MGT file. So it's used to represent a single drive item that's retrieved from Microsoft Graph. And you can display the file with its file type icon as well as properties, however many you want. It's configurable by you as a developer. And there are multiple ways for you to actually specify which file that you want to show. So in this example, we're giving the full file query to an item. You could also provide the drive ID and item ID for an item in a specific drive. Same with the site ID. Or you can also specify by insight type. So the Insights API on Microsoft Graph provides 3 different insight types, which is shared, recently used, and trending. So if you wanted to specify a file that's in one of those lists, you could do that as well. And this is just an example of the different views that you can configure as a developer. So you can change how many lines of text that is shown, as well as change what properties are being shown as well. And then the second component that we're working on is the file list. So this is a representation of a list of files that's retrieved from Graph. By default, it'll show the signed in user's root drive. So that's what's happening here. It shows the folders. You can expand the list to show additional items. And then similarly to the file component, there are multiple ways where you can specify what list of files that you want to show. So this is an example showing using a file query, so providing the full path to where the files are. You can do the same thing with the drive ID and show files within a specific drive or folder. Same with site ID. And then insights as well. So here we're showing the files for this user that are returned by the trending insight type. And then the third one that's coming will be file picker. We don't have a preview of that yet, but it will be coming soon. And so if you want to try either the file components or the MSAL 2.0 provider, you can do that now. By using the next.file or next.msal2 provider preview packages.
Actually, the MSAL2 provider preview package, we're still working on publishing that, but it should be available in the next 1 or 2 days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just note that they are previews, so
yeah,
they're subject to change. If you try them out and want to give us feedback, that would be great. Here are just some resources for if you want to get started with the toolkit or learn more. These are all great places to start.
Perfect. Yeah, and those links are going to be available on the actual blog post that we put out for the community talk. So Again, I appreciate your time. Great work from the MVP team. Always exciting to see what you folks have to present. So I appreciate your time, Elise and Amruta. So for the last 30 minutes, just some house-cleaning stuff. So we have the Microsoft Graph TAP program. The TAP program basically is a monthly call that we have. We have our next call tomorrow, and it gives you access to some new and upcoming features, right? We notify you, we introduce what's coming down the pipe, gives you an overview of the roadmap. We present some case studies, and it's another opportunity for you folks to share feedback to the product group. So if you're interested, we're still looking for additional partners and customers to join the TAP program. There's a link at the bottom here. Again, that link is going to be available on the blog post. So aka.ms/graph TAP form to register. We have plenty of other developer community calls. So if you enjoyed the content today, feel free to go and join one of the other community calls we have. We have an exhaustive list on the screen right now. You can find all the other calls we have at aka.ms/M365 dev calls. We have our weekly podcast with Jeremy and Paul. So always great content, great guests on the show. Feel free to register to that. Great stuff to listen to. And last but not least, we also have the Microsoft Graph Mailbag blog series that we're putting out. We're putting them out twice a month. So we have one on the 2nd and the 4th Tuesday of the month. The next one is going out next Tuesday. So great content there as well. Again, thank you for joining. The recording will be available on the YouTube channel at aka.ms/M365dev YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter at Microsoft365Dev. And the next community call is going to be on May 4th at 8 p.m. So you can actually grab the calendar invite at aka.ms/Microsoft Graph Call. So again, I was Nik Charlebois. Thank you for your time. Thank you to all the speakers for the amazing content. And we will see you again next month. Enjoy and stay safe. Bye.